Those are recording. Okay, so we're going to cover 3 different topics tonight.
And let's just make sure that that's actually Stephen.
Is that Stephen there on the iPhone?
We could have a spy and not even know it, say something wrong.
Yes, it's me.
Okay,
Hi, Steve.
I assume you're eating dinner.
Hi. Yes, and I had to find the mute button when I was on here. So,
Okay,
yeah, I'm here.
okay, great. So we're going to cover one piece on meditation, one piece on astrology, and then one piece on Joseph of Arimathea and his relationship with Jesus and all kinds of things that were related to that. So that is what we're going to do. And what I've got here is our book, which is Radically Happy. And we're going to cover just part 1 in the book, which is called Basic Happiness or Mastering the Mind. And there are 3 keys to basic happiness. Always react to thoughts the same way, relax the comparing, and be present. Okay, so we're going to go through each of those 3. The key to basic happiness is to get used to being fully present in the moment. Just as it is. The more we're able to be in the present moment, the less the ingrained habit of thinking about thoughts will have the power to distract us. Okay, so let me go back to the three keys to basic happiness. Always react to thoughts the same way. So the practice of meditation is an incredibly effective way to become more and more familiar with remaining present. While meditating, we practice reacting to whatever comes to our mind in the exact same way, no matter what sensations, thoughts, or emotions arise. We do not follow after them. Instead of thinking about them, we remain anchored, fully present in the moment. Okay, that's number 1. Always react to the thoughts the same way. Number 2, relax the comparing. The involuntary habit of constantly evaluating experience distracts us and makes it difficult to fully enjoy even life's simplest pleasures. But it gets worse. These thoughts build upon and reinforce each other. They grow into the world's biggest stealer of contentment, comparing ourselves to others and their circumstances. We can relax the comparing by learning to accept ourselves, warts and all. We can learn to appreciate what we have. So that's relax the comparing. And the final one is to be present. Although the practice of meditation, through the practice of meditation, we turn our attention toward the present moment, but we have to be able to bring the awareness of the present moment from the meditation cushion into the ordinary everyday experience. That way, when things are going well, we can drop most of our usual strategies for trying to keep the good times rolling, and instead just be present and enjoy. Also, when disaster strikes, we won't completely lose our equanimity and become depressed. The whole point of meditation practice is to become so familiar with a state of non-distraction that we can integrate the be present experience into whatever we are doing. So those are the 3 things. Now, there's some chapters that go with these. So I'm going to go to, they're expanding. I just gave you the little snapshot or paragraph of each of those 3 things. So the next section, we're going to go back and revisit this. Always react to thoughts the same way. And a lot of this has to do with focusing on your breath so that you have a routine you fall back on. And this allows you to always react the same way. The quote we get here is, don't just do something, sit there. So just sit there and measure your breathing, and don't hit the panic button. And another thing to keep in mind, we have these natural awareness to make sure we're being mindful. We use our natural awareness to make sure we're being mindful. This has two purposes. It keeps the grasping monkey mind busy by being mindful so that it can't distract us, and it allows us to gradually become more and more familiar with awareness itself. The more familiar we become with our awareness, the more we enter into non-distraction. I like that, non-distraction. I think that's a good way of framing it. They have different exercises. So one of them is just looking at an object, whereas the first one was focusing on your breath, or using the sensation of sound, or smell and taste, or different things like this, or just scanning your body from head to toe, and so forth. So that's the first thing that we covered. So now the second one is relax the comparing. We don't want to get caught up with comparing what we're doing to everything else. And we start with A.A. Milne, who wrote what did Milne write? Here we've got Piglet.
Yeah, it's
I just got a block.
He wrote Woody the Pooh.
yes, Woody the Pooh, yes.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh. There we go. Thank you. We have a scholar. Piglet noticed that even though he had a very small heart, he could hold a rather large amount of gratitude. Okay. And another thing here from Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson, the singer, wrote a book called The Tao of Willie. When I started counting my blessings, my whole life turned around. And so it goes. So not being caught up. Willie actually had a ranch in Evergreen, Colorado, where my cousin lives. And he had this whole pile of llamas there. I mean, 20, 30 llamas running around in this ranch. And then the IRS showed up and asked Willie where the income tax payments were. And Willie had a nice vacation, all paid for with our tax dollars. So that's that section. And then the final section is to be present. Okay. Here we start with Lincoln. I don't know who my grandfather was. I'm much more concerned to know what his grandson will be. His grandson will be. So that's, again, the intent here is to just be present. And there's various little drills that you can run through to do these things, and so forth. I'm just looking to see if there's any, I don't think there's any other quotes in here. And then they close the section with a daily plan for basic happiness. So this is something you could do every day. Just a suggestion, basic happiness. In the morning, wake into the present moment. Instead of jumping out of bed, notice how your body feels by doing a brief body scan. Imagine how you'll begin the day with meditation practice. Make an aspiration that the day will be one of mindful awareness. Then go into morning meditation, which is a practice for creating space, and then meditate for a few minutes using focus on the breath or another method. Spend a few moments reflecting on something that you're grateful for and celebrate and appreciate the effort you made to meditate. And then some mindful drinking. Sip your morning coffee or tea with present moment awareness. In the afternoon, take a few little mindful mini breaks whenever and wherever you are throughout the day. Create space, watch your breath, and cultivate an attitude of gratitude. Then finally, in the evening, do an evening meditation, a few moments at the end of the day. Create space. If you aren't too exhausted, watch the breath for a few minutes, think of something for tomorrow's gratitude, contemplation, reflect on how, despite a lifetime spent mostly chasing distraction, you spent a bit of time practicing. And then celebrate the few moments you meditated, especially if you took a mini break or 3 during the day. Then visualize yourself doing it again tomorrow. Have fun. Mindfully slip into sleep. As you lie in bed, create an attitude of gratitude and then rest as you fall mindfully to sleep. So there we go. So we're pretty much halfway through this right now. So now we're going to just do a little video, which we came up with. Hold on one second while I go get it. And here we go. Is this thing up all the way?
It has been quite a privilege being able to grow up in two quite different ways of life. I was born in Germany and at the same time had the chance to learn more about ancient art coming
Can
from
you
a
hear
Shaolin
him?
country. When you grow up in an Asian family, it is quite common that firstly, you don't argue with your father, and secondly, you either become medical doctor, engineer, or lawyer, elsewise your parents will be very unhappy. So, having that said, I finished my academic education with 2 university degrees, an MBA, and quite a collection of different certificates and diplomas. Everything that my parents saw be useful to have. But throughout this education, I felt something was missing. Because I was learning about many different aspects. How the plant is working, what an atom is made out of, how political system is functioning. But somehow the subject was missing to learn something about myself. So with the age of 4, for the first time, I got introduced into the monastic practices. And I was very happy to find out that the main part of these practices were dealing with the exploration and the discovery of yourself. There was mental training, development of behavior, combined with the physical training, all aspects of what nowadays is known as Shaolin Kung Fu. Now, despite the wishes of my parents to somehow go out in the market and try to manage the world, I decided to continue this monastic life and start learning more about myself first. Now, in the preparation for this talk, I was asked to share a few words on what is important in this lifetime. And see, it's already challenging to put 3 decades into a single talk. But the picture I would like to show you summarizes very much what I consider as being valuable in this lifetime. There is something about sharing with others. There is something about connection. There is the training and development of yourself. It is to enjoy your time, even doing nothing. And one main aspect is to find a way and do the things you like to do. Now, when I received the invitation to have a talk at today's event, especially under the slogan, High, Higher, Highest, something very particular came up on my mind. And a master from the Shaolin Temple once told me a story that I would like to share with you. A man was living close to a mountain, and every day he was thinking, how would it be to climb that mountain, and what would I see on the peak? So finally the day came. The man went on the journey. Arriving at the foot of the mountain, he met the first traveler. So he asked, how did you get up the mountain, and what did you see from the top? And so the traveler shared his path and also the view that he had. But then the man was thinking, the way that this traveler described to me sounds very exhausting. I need to find another way to climb. So he continued to walk on the foot of the mountain until he met the next traveler. So once again he asked, how did you climb up that mountain? And what did you see from the top? And so again the traveler shared his story. Still not being determined on which direction and which way to go, the man asked 30 more people, 30 more travelers. When he finished talking to all of them, he finally made up his mind. Now that so many people already shared with me their path, and especially what they all saw from the top, I don't need to climb there anymore. It is very unfortunate this man never went on the journey. Now, to conclude this story, firstly, each individual needs to find the most suitable way to climb that mountain. But secondly, there is information possible to be shared with words. But it is impossible to share the experience of clarity when you are standing on that peak by yourself. To invest the right effort in climbing that peak is very much what all the Buddhist practices, the Shaolin training, or any spiritual practice is about. Clarity means you see more clear. When you see more clear, interrelations become more apparent. When you see more clear, there is no need to believe anyone or believe anything. Being clear means you can distinguish for yourself which is the proper direction to take and which decisions do I have to make in order to make my goals or aspirations start to shape. Now at today's talk, you will have the chance to become inspired by quite a lot of different travelers. But in this particular talk, I can't and I won't tell you which way to go. It's just that along your personal journey, you will encounter challenges. Those challenges will either prevent you, or some of them even stop you from moving on and climbing that mountain. In the Shaolin Temple, we refer to them as the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances are describing different states of the mind. In those states of the mind, it becomes very hard to see clearly and therefore engage in the right decisions. The first hindrance is called sensual desire. Sensual desire arises in the moment when you are paying attention to something that is giving you a positive emotion. This positive emotion can originate from 5 gates of your body: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or feeling. So in your mind, you climb up that mountain. After 1 mile of walking, you discover a beautiful restaurant surrounded by beautiful people. You smell delicious food and the great variety of beverages. When you follow that temptation, you have already lost your track. When this temptation becomes so strong that you don't want to leave that place anymore, then the sensual desire has turned into an obsession. In both cases, remaining at that place means you can't get clarity. The second hindrance, ill will, describes a state of the mind that arises from negative emotions. In that state of the mind, you have an aversion, a rejection, or simply a dislike against either an object, a situation, or can be even a person. To simplify, it means you are climbing the mountain and it starts to rain, but you don't like rain. You discover the roads are bumpy, but you don't like bumpy roads. In order to cross the river, you need to swim, but you don't like swimming. Whatever it is that you dislike, it won't make it a pleasant journey. Unless you learn to let go of this ill will, it's more likely even that you won't continue that journey. The third hindrance, originally translated as sloth and torpor. Sloth means it's the heaviness of the body. Torpor means it's the dullness of the mind. It is characterized by sleepiness, non-motivation, lack of energy, and oftentimes can manifest itself in a state of depression. Now, similarly used in Buddhism, describes it as imprisonment. You find yourself locked in a cell. It becomes very hard to make any type of mental or physical effort. So, in order to continue your path, there is only one option left. You need to find a way to get out from that hole, from that cell. Now, the fourth hindrance is called restlessness. It is the state of an unsettled mind. Unsettled mind means your mind cannot settle. Settle where? Settle in the present moment. An unsettled mind either is worrying about the future or traveling into the past and rejecting, judging about an event that happened into your past. The simile used here is the monkey mind, constantly jumping from one branch to another, unable to stay for too long time at the present moment. The problem is, there is no time to see clearly anymore. Now, the last of the 5 hindrances is called skeptical doubt, and is very closely related to a state of mind which is based on indecisiveness. It is very easy in that state of mind getting lost in thoughts. Can I do this? Is this the right path? What will the others say? What if this? What if that? The mind cannot synchronize with your own actions anymore. And the result is that you are getting disconnected with the goals and aspirations that once you have set to yourself. When the way is filled with too much doubts, more often you will stop instead of moving on. That we know the 5 hindrances now. What are we going to do about them? You need to align and structure your life in such a way to prevent those hindrances from arising. If you are not successful, you need to use techniques in order to remove them. Each of these hindrances is placing a dark cloud on your mind or on the way of your climb. Simply remember one thing. Just let it rain. This is a 4-step method to help you removing those hindrances. The first step is recognize in what state of the mind you are finding yourself in. Afterwards, learn to accept, acknowledge, and allow the situation or a person to be the way how it is, to be the way how they are. Investigate your emotional and mental state and ask questions. Why did it come up? What is going to be the consequence if I remain in that state? And ultimately, non-identification means it is the practice. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am not my emotion. It's just that I can see all these 3 aspects about me. All of our lifetimes, all of our lives are too unique to copy the past from someone else. To bring meaning to your life, to bring value into your life, you need to learn and master yourself. And don't let the hindrances stop you. If any of you chooses to climb that path to clarity, I will be very happy to meet you at the peak.
So I saw that Nancy just joined. So what we did, which you can see on the, was we went through a piece of Radically Happy, and then we went through this video, which is on our website on the religion tab. So if you want to go back and look at it. Let me just check one thing. Oh, we're up all the way. Okay. So we're gonna try and finish this book in the next couple of weeks. But any comments on this about meditation or anything in the video that jumped at anybody?
Has anybody gotten their own copy of the book to read it at home?
It's very readable. It's, radically happy. So
Yeah,
Bruce.
I'm gonna order it myself. I like it. I like what the basic tenets are, and it's good to be reminded of it in a succinct, small book. So yeah, I think it's great. It's easy to digest from what you've shared thus far.
Well, it's actually deep too. There's a lot of good stuff there. It's deep.
Mm,
And they've
Yeah.
broken it up very well into bite-sized pieces
yep.
that
Yeah.
are simple enough that you can take it in and you almost don't realize until you look back, the depth that's been there.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
Now we're going to go to Marjorie.
Well, I wanted to share, I liked what they said about
Hold on.
comparison so much because
Yeah. Somebody-
it's taken me a long time to really understand that there's no point anyway, because we're all apples and oranges. You're never comparing the same thing. When you're comparing two people or two lives, some people seem to have it very easy. That's probably just because we don't know their pain.
Yep. I like to call ourselves, we're all snowflakes in this bus. And every one of us has got it just like a snowflake. And you're right, we never know anybody's what's really going on. We only see a slice, a tiny view. And I definitely think the dropping the need to compare is a huge release of energy, of just like, it's wonderful when you can let go of that. And yet here we are there's sort of part of the world is working in that direction. And then we have, Instagram with the young girls that are just really struggling because they're all, comparing themselves to, once again, some ideal that almost doesn't exist. It's artificially concocted. And and people get themselves wrapped around the axle in that comparison. So yeah, a lot of wasted energy.
Well, on that note, so many young women becoming bulimic.
Yeah.
They're trying to look like the fashion models. And then Jane Fonda did such a disservice to, women.
Well, I also think it was the fashion magazines where many of the graphics creators are gay men. And so their ideal of a woman is, they want to see something that looks like a young boy, and, and so they, it's not really, we've never really had that female style in vogue and down through the ages of, very, very thin bodies. And so again, it's maybe because in the eye of the beholder, maybe those were the creators, on Madison Avenue. And then for me, what I realized, this is a feudal game when I was reading an article where they were, zipping up Cindy Crawford's thighs with, Adobe Photoshop. And I'm thinking, if Cindy Crawford's thighs need to be zipped up, then there is no perfect female.
Right.
And I have a friend that's a supermodel. And they used to take these big like clamps and clamp parts of her body to get like for the photos. And I'm like, there is no perfect female, which is not really a healthy, it's not healthy because it's saying you're not good enough unless we do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
Sorry. I just, I'll shut up now.
The girls are ranting. Well, and
I
legs came up to, proportionately up to where, her chin should have been. But it is serious, it does create serious issues for girls and women.
I'd like to mention that one of the main benefits of meditating and developing mindfulness and awareness is you notice these things happening in your own mind. I
Yeah.
mean, most people just to have these happening in their own mind and they don't even notice, just carry on to the next thing, whatever they want to do. But that's the advantage of focusing the mind. You start noticing these things in the mind and you start realizing, oh,
Right, it's a good point.
And that you can disengage from it. You don't have to slavishly follow even your own thoughts, just as they arise. You don't have to completely, well, I like the saying, you don't have to believe everything you think, but you don't have to go with it. You can kind of stay in one place and they come and they go and you're not with them.
Yeah. Well, I'd just like to mention, I mean, you start noticing various patterns that you don't really like that much. But transcending them is not so easy, but you start off with realizing that they are arising in your own mind.
Right.
That's sort of when the work begins, is when you try to transcend them.
Well, thank you again to Bruce for this book
Oh, you're welcome.
on radical happiness. It's
Well,
a-
one of the main things about it is that the author, Petro Rinpoche, really understands the mind really, really well. So, that's where he comes from. That's why the book is so good.
Okay, well, thank you for all that. So now I want to back, as we usually do, I'll backtrack a little. This is a new section on the website that we're just introducing. So if people are ever making their ways to Aleph Talks, we're adding some blogs there. Bart will be adding more in the near future. So this shows there are 3 sections so far. And this section kind of has little summaries of each one. This is the software that we're using really just because our webmaster set us up with it, and it's good. So I hope to be starting monthly update columns. This is just an old sample from years ago to show what that'll be like. And I'm going to work with lunar cycles, so from new moon to new moon rather than the calendar months of the year. There's a miscellaneous section, and this was an essay I really enjoyed researching and writing for an academic publisher years ago, and was one of the things that really cemented my relationship with Bart when I realized, how deep his work was in mathematics. I said, "Oh, you must know Darcy Wentworth-Thompson." And this was in other people who have built on his work. He would actually publish an alternate view of evolution that I wish more people were aware of. And here's these are just right now random articles in no particular order. And this is the one that we started working with last week. And so I'll do our usual thing. I'll backtrack a little to try to summarize. And really, this came up in the top context that we were talking about of free will, of is there any free will, or is it everything absolutely predestined? And I think it's interesting that I'm the astrologer in the group and I'm the one advocating for free will. So then what is it exactly that we're looking at when we look at a chart? And so that's the question. And what does it mean? The kind of astrology that I was really trained in, my teacher didn't, she knew Jung's work, she appreciated it, but she didn't consider herself to be a Jungian astrologer per se. She felt that was an unnecessary redundancy. But actually, Jung, it's turning out now through scholarship, people are realizing a lot of his psychological philosophy comes from astrology. But the kind of astrology that she introduced me to is called transformational astrology, which may sound like a complete oxymoron. You know, that may seem like a contradiction in terms. You know, how could you be looking at a chart of, you know, what's given and then transform it? So that those are the questions that I wanted to answer, that I wanted to introduce. That we say a horoscope does not show our future written in stone, and no responsible astrologer would ever claim that it does. What a horoscope does show is our tendencies and potentials of our inherent personality patterns, for better and or for worse. They are also likely to unfold in time as represented by the cyclical movements of the planets, and also progressions, which are purely mathematical. I don't know why it works, I just know that it does. But these inclinations and likelihoods are not absolutely guaranteed, but neither can they be completely eliminated. A lot of people in New Age circles like to talk about transcending the chart. And I say you can learn to express it on higher levels that can become more refined and more conscious, but I don't believe one can completely transcend it. So that's what we're talking about here. And I say we shouldn't have to, because the personality is not a bad thing. The ego is not a bad thing. It's merely the vehicle for the soul, the same way the body is. So you don't want to identify completely with that slavishly, but I don't believe we have the free will to completely transcend it. But I think we have more free will than we realize. And that's actually what I see my job as an astrologer as being, is to enhance that for people, to help them become more conscious of what their default patterns are and how to reframe their experience and how to work with it so that you're at least actively procreating with the divine, with the universe, and with the patterns that are set. But there's no way of ultimately knowing, you know, but sometimes I think the more we do expand the, you know, at least the experience of our free will, sometimes I think you're just raising the ante and you're bringing on more challenging karma. I don't know if that's true, but that's the way it has felt for me. But I don't believe that we can control the prevailing winds, no matter how enlightened we become. But we can learn to set our sails and we can learn to tack, potentially radically changing where we end up, especially inwardly, experientially, even given the outline set forth in our horoscopes. So that's really what we're looking at when we look at a horoscope, is the outline. We can also learn to work in sync with the divine timing of our karmic lessons, perhaps even turning challenges into opportunities, at least for spiritual growth, if not absolute freedom, rather than being completely broadsided by inner and outer weather conditions that are somewhat predictable and somewhat transmutable. I say the root of divination is divine. So an insightful astrologer can help catalyze your individual process of unfoldment, which is another way of saying your individuation process that Jung is talking about. It's about becoming yourself. It's not about becoming anybody else or some ideal human. It's becoming the best possible version of yourself that you can be. So this is regardless of whether you're facing easy or difficult cycles, pointing out any upcoming pitfalls you will likely be facing, along with optimal opportunities for growth and consciousness during both challenging and fortunate or expansive cycles, which might otherwise be missed, supports you in your spiritual development and helps you achieve your highest potential, which is also shown in the birth chart. So ultimately, though, human life being what it is, we can often see, particularly looking back with 2020 hindsight, that we tend to grow the most during or following our most intensely challenging experiences and relationships. This is why seasoned transformational astrologers, which is what I identify as, encourage living life to its fullest with all of its ups and downs as a full contact sport, rather than from the sidelines as a spectator or a bystander, much less a passive victim. And this is a Sufi saying, when the heart grieves for what it has lost, the spirit rejoices for what it has found. So very often, the things that we're grasping in the kind of Buddhist language, we're grasping for on a personality level, become blessings when we don't get them or achieve them. It can take us to a much deeper place in terms of real spiritual development. So that's how I've always taken that saying. So we believe that astrology works on Jung's principle of synchronicity rather than linear cause and effect. The more that Bart and I have been talking for the past going on 3 years now, the more I'm seeing and I'm rereading Jung. I used to get very frustrated reading him because I wanted him to just make up his mind. But what I've realized rereading him now, at my age now, I started reading him when I was 30, seriously. His mind was changing over the course of his study and development and his work. So he thought different things at different times. He came to different conclusions at different times. And some were more formed than others. And I think in the end, he thought it actually was more causal in a different way than he thought it was initially. And that's definitely what's happening for me. It's a different kind of causality. It's not the simple causality that we're sort of raised to think. But so what I came to think of is that events are happening at the same time. It's the microcosm within the macrocosm, as they say. So below as it is above, so as it is above, so it is below. So I see it as gears moving within gears, happening in parallel. And in some ways, it's just easier to see it because it's simpler and more abstract when we're looking at the planetary relationships. And I don't know why they reflect. So here's this image from Kepler showing the platonic solids associated with the planetary spheres. You can imagine each orbit of each planet as being one of the platonic solid shapes, just for example. So I see things as holographic. And as I said, kind of nested like Chinese boxes, like the orbits of the planets. And that's really how Kabbalah is framed. We see it in a side view when we look at the tree, but it's really representing a spherical construction. So I want to make clear, a symbolic language is not a simplistic equation of this equals that. By definition, a symbol is polyvalent, which means it has many possible meanings. And astrological symbols have many possible interpretations and expressions in how they manifest in real life terms. This is where some degree of free will is thought to lie in the interpretation. In our ability to shift the specific expression of the energies involved, particularly from a less conscious level of expression to a more conscious level by working at it. What you're working at is your consciousness. So many astrologers encourage some form of spiritual practice and training. My teacher happened to be a Sufi practitioner as well as a Quaker. And I didn't realize until I went back to my Unitarian roots how close we really were in terms of alignment. Because I think it's the morality of the Quaker way and the Unitarian are very similar. And she also needed some form of mysticism, and wasn't content just with the moral aspect of. Although the Quakers have their experiential dimension as well. But so a symbol isn't just like a stop sign means stop. That has one meaning. That's all it means. A symbol is not a sign. A symbol has possible definitions, but within limits. So what I believe is we can shift the level of it. And the principal way of working at it is through spiritual studies and practices. And we can learn to become more conscious of the latitude that we actually do have in making certain decisions. Then we might want to acknowledge, really. So each planet in astrological terms and the language of astrology, we can think of as heading a distinct column of possibilities. So Mars, for example, is about certain things and not other things. But it doesn't only signify war or violence or anger. It can also be a gamut of things, but it's never going to be Venus. So for example, it can also be aggression and competition, but it doesn't really have to be any of those things. It can simply be action or drive, ambition, hard work, especially physical work, effort, and willpower. To some extent, with inner work and discipline, we can choose the level of expression of the martial energy within its given range of possibilities. What we cannot choose, however, is to turn Mars energy into Venus energy or Saturn energy. We can't change columns. In and of itself, Mars is never going to translate into Venusian love, beauty, charm, or harmony, or Saturnian discipline, focus, or commitment. One of the highest expressions of Saturnian energy, which most people kind of flinch from, but one of its best expressions is wisdom. But that is usually achieved through hard-earned experience, which is another Saturnian concept, and not conferred automatically. But in combination with these other archetypal energies, wow, though, the sheer force of Mars can move mountains and build magnificent cathedrals when it is consciously directed and shaped. Mars, positively tempered by Saturn, connotes skill and sharpening. Or in a less evolved stage, this combination can be like having one foot on the gas and the other on the brakes in a frustrating stop-go pattern. When the two energies are working together intelligently, on the other hand, it is said to result in gradual, guided, and controlled progress. So these are examples from the workbook that I've put together. If people really want to learn astrology and put in the time and effort, this method that I developed years ago can really speed it up and make it kind of fun. Can we show these? Well,
Yeah, just click on,
stop share.
yeah, you can stop share, but then what do you want to, don't you want to just click on?
Well,
Oh, I see.
then I wanted to show them in my hand.
Oh, I thought you wanted, okay.
These are the Astro dice that I figured out to use as a teaching tool. And so it gives us the experience of consulting an oracle, and that helps us speed up the process of learning what all these little squiggles mean. So there's an example, if I turn it right side up, that's Pluto. And there's all kinds of beautiful details in the symbolism of why that represents Pluto. And then here are all of the signs. So there's Pisces, that's Capricorn upside down and backwards. There's Taurus. So these are 12-sided die, so they're dodecahedrons. And you can ask a question, and these dice come with a book that you can order, a little booklet. And it's a lot like the booklet that I give you with these columns of definitions. So it gets you thinking creatively in terms of generating. Do I go back here?
What do you want to do?
Go back to the,
Should just share a screen?
yeah.
Hold on. Go here.
I think that's an extra step, but okay, thank you. So here are the columns. So let's say we roll Mars first. Here it's associated with its archetypal sign. There's a correspondence between Mars, Aries, and the first house. Mars is said to rule Aries. It's just because they're the most parallel. And one is the Greek name and the other is the Roman name. So it's the sign Aries, that's a cardinal fire sign, and it's Yang. That's really why it's Aries, along with the fact that it's the first sign. It couldn't be anything other than Aries because it's got that Yang energy, that oomph to be first. So here are all the possible expressions of Mars. Now I'm going to move this back up here. I'll get this. I'm going to get it up. There. Mars can be, this isn't exhaustive, but it's pretty thorough. all of these possibilities. And it's very closely related to the energy of Aries. So forceful, assertive, impulsive, all those kinds of things. But you want that. You want that to get the year going. You know, that's the first sign of the year that's coming out of the winter. You want that kind of oomph to get the entire year going, the entire zodiac going. So that's where drive comes from. They're very often entrepreneurial because they're self-motivated. And that's one of the keywords associated with Aries and Mars. So this is the first house, and these are the correspondences. So if you happen to have Mars in the first house, it's going to be accentuated because of that overlapping of the factors. So this is kind of the prototypical arrangement, is Mars and Aries in the first house. But Mars can be in any sign, and it can be in any house, in any given horoscope or transit. So what I have people do is take the booklet, make a copy, and then fold these pages in thirds, and you can cut them apart. So then you have strips, so they can be more modular, and you can mix and match in a more natural way. Because you could have Mars in Sagittarius or Mars in Taurus, or any, it could be in any sign at all. So then you can play with your terms in a more realistic way. So these are, what I'm saying is, these are the possibilities. And with consciousness and work on ourselves and imagination, we can learn that every time we feel a kind of ego-driven impulse to be in conflict, we don't have to take that bait. We can work with it. It's not good to just suppress it. It usually comes out in some other way. But we could turn that into, see astrology is really being for, is to make these suggestions, to say, well, you've got this default energy, but you don't have to act on it with anger. Here are some other choices. So we talked about this somewhat last week. So here's, I'm saying this again. You can begin to see the commonalities among the planet signs and houses, but you also can separate them. So these are the Astrodice that you can order. There's a link here to an Amazon source for ordering them. If everybody wanted to order them, we could work out how to do this at home. I would need to be exploring new software, which I don't have. I would convert the booklet that I've done, which I would send to you as a PDF, and then we'd have to work out how to get that to be interactive software, which is probably a good experiment for me to be getting into, given how long it seems that we're going to be working online. So here, that's where we left off last week. And I wanted to give you an example of a transformational approach.
Just a thought before you move on, which is, if there is no existing software, and if you have a booklet that no one on the topic that no one else has produced, you might find yourself in a position to contact the manufacturer of the Astrodice to say, hey, I've got complementary products for you.
Oh, that's interesting.
Always the entrepreneur.
Well, that's good. We're looking for ideas, and that would be nice. They do give you a very handy little booklet That's kind of like the beginning of what I did, which is just longer, columns with more examples. And they could be longer than they are. I just stopped when I filled up a page, but they do work really well. And if there was a way to make it electronic, they are doing interactive tarot software, that might be really fun.
And thinking further, you could then create a whole class system and structure to market
Right,
for the company that's producing the Astrodice too. So
right.
just always thinking about how to leverage.
So here they are, and they have lots of nice images. And they just went up. They were much cheaper a couple of weeks ago. They were 14 something, but anyway, it's not a lot. I used to order them, by a box load that I would then give them as part of the fee for the classes that I was teaching. But since we're all over the place, it doesn't make any sense for me to order them for everybody. But thank you. That maybe we should talk further at that. You would be a good consultant because you know astrology. So that could be really good. So here I'm trying to give you a real life example. And to tell you the truth, I have a strong Mars. And when I first learned what that meant astrologically, I was in a lot of denial about it. And I kept saying, no, I'm not like that. I would never. And finally, my teacher said, this is my first teacher, he said, well, would you ever really back down from a confrontation? Do you ever do that? I said, no, I'm not necessarily in your face about it, but I could be extremely stubborn and I don't just back down and turn over. He said, well, that's because it's in Taurus in your case. So that's what a strong-willed Mars and Taurus, mine is in the first house, is stubborn. It's persistent. I'm up against opponents in the legal arena, and that is a martial arena, that they just can't believe I've managed to stick it out for this is the 12th year now. But that's because I have that kind of stubborn, fixed drive. It's not aggressive per se, unless you really, really, really cross it. But so somebody with a lot of Mars energy can tend to be irritable. That's one of the pitfalls. And if you don't want the angry side of a Mars transit, if you're not used to having it natally, there are things that can be done. So I recommend a lot of physical exercise, maybe even a martial art, so to speak. Personally, I would always advocate for a non-violent martial art. Anything physically strenuous and rigorous and not too gentle or yin or intellectual or subtle. It should be physical. It should be, it involves some real exertion to discharge the energy in a positive way. So I suggest redirecting the challenging energy into productive or at least harmless channels, rather than expressing it destructively or suppressing it, only for it to turn inward, possibly as illness or mishaps, or perhaps to explode more violently later on. That's a very typical thing. Or if repressed for a significant period of time, blocked anger often manifests psychologically as deep-seated depression, with a whole new set of baggage to contend with. And that is something that I suffered with personally. So anyone dealing with strong Mars or Aries energy in their birth chart or transit chart usually needs some amount of physical activity, not just mental, to stay, or just spiritual, to stay in balance. Sports can be a healthy competitive outlet, or simply a daily walk or run can help even out one's energy. The more these folks are able to work with this fiery energy consciously, the more positive its real life expressions are bound to be. For most of my life, I have walked at least a mile every day. When I lived in the city, I did it in the city. I climbed 5 or at one point 6 flights of stairs, and with groceries, and I walked to and from work from Midtown Manhattan to downtown Manhattan. I need that kind of physical exercise every day. And I was and you get these vicious circles going on. The only time in my life I haven't done that, especially as an adult, was when I was really sick. And that was adding to my sickness. So now that I've been able to walk every day, I'm getting an upward spiral going. It's really the same principle. So it really has to be physical to the extent that it can be. For me, walking slowly with my bad ankle when it was still really painful, and I have a bad hip from the bad ankle, that was a lot of exertion for me, even going really slowly. I certainly couldn't compare myself to the, real marathon walkers and runners who were going at a normal pace. But for me, it was a real exertion, and that was life-saving. So what I've learned is, particularly for women, learning to consciously direct one's yang Mars energy toward a physical task like gardening or a renovation project, rather than judging or rejecting the Mars energy or trying to resist it or control it or repress it, or attempting to soften it or spiritualize this naturally masculine energy, will bring out the best that Mars has to offer. These kinds of choices, once made more consciously and less judgmentally than we usually have available to us or experience them as being, can transform problem areas into joyful, where we truly can cultivate and articulate greater free will within limits. And we can drastically transform the course of our whole lives and relationships for the better. It can be profoundly liberating for an unbiased stranger to point out that you are designed to be rather highly strung, driven, feisty, and energetic, and to invite you to accept and work with this dimension of your personality, especially when this is the case. And you may have received a lot of harsh conditioning against this fundamental quality over which you did not have any apparent control, but were constantly berated with disapproving messages that you should fix or change these inherent traits. Why don't you just mellow out and be more easygoing, cooperative, and nice? That is, more Venusian or Libran, perhaps like your sister or brother. We can really take the pressure off when an astrologer indicates that this is simply not an available option for a strong Aries Mars type. However, guess what? Ironically, the more you accept who you are and learn to work with your intrinsic energies in more constructive ways, the more the rough edges actually do tend to smooth out. While you may never become a cuddly pussycat, conscious Mars types can learn to retract their claws, at least on occasion. You can then access the best expressions of Mars's strength, such as drive and leadership ability, rather than being at the mercy of its unconscious negative or shadow qualities. But you still won't get Venus. Being given this kind of permission to be who you really are, consider new ways of framing your experience and new ways of expressing your fundamental character, can be profoundly healing and liberating. This is where one's consciousness can actually grow through the use of astrological insights, paradoxically through the use of free will, with self-responsibility being the other side of the coin. Jung says free will is doing freely and gladly that which one must do. Individuation is not about becoming someone new or other than who we are. It's about becoming who we truly are in the healthiest and most authentic sense, and embracing that unique essence as our destiny. So there's the little blurb about me.
Very nice.
So now do we go,
There.
go back there?
Let's do this.
I'm gonna have to start really learning all this.
So there we are. Any comments? It's all on the website. Remember, you can go there at your leisure and read this and everything, all the other things Marjorie's been posting there. So
So we can download the workbook, Marjorie?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah,
I don't have the whole workbook up there yet.
okay, but pieces, something.
Yes,
Okay, that's great. That's wonderful. I like the dice idea because I think it does help repetition wise become familiar with the characters or the language set. And so I think it makes it fun. I like that. And I love what you put together. That was excellent. I would like to pursue that.
well, that's great, and I need some guinea pigs to work with, so you guys
Yeah.
do me a favor too, because it's hard to do it in a vacuum, you know.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll download this stuff and
Okay,
I'll be one of your guinea pigs.
great.
You
Gotten the whole book. A lot of this, it's very symbolic. A lot of this material I'm resurrecting out of my old computer that had crashed years ago. And Bart was kind enough to pay to get the hard drive extracted. And now we've actually
They put it
resurrected
on
the
a flash
computer. Yeah,
drive.
they put it on a flash drive for me. But I was afraid that all of these files of years and years of work were permanently lost. But I can't necessarily, because the software is so old. It's not as simple as just using it on a new computer and translating it. So I'm in a big conversion process, but it's part of my resurrection to get the material out of that old computer and into a usable form. So I haven't done the entire workbook, but I did send out, I think it's got most of it
Yeah.
in that version, but we can send it again.
Yeah.
And I'll, continue the resurrection to get the rest of the material. But this was something I downloaded. It definitely came from above. It wasn't really my idea. Somebody told me about the dice. I saw them and I said, oh, that could be a way to learn. Because if you're asking a divinational question, you're motivated to answer it. And if you just get these cryptic, symbols, strewn on your table and you don't know what they mean, it becomes a drill to memorize the sigils. And there's some very cool mnemonics for what they mean symbolically. And I'd love to share that. That help you understand. I always say that understanding something conceptually is easier than just memorizing. So that's something I'd really like to share with people.
Okay, so we will now go to our last topic, if there's no push. And that's going to be this. This is a book you can get on Amazon. You look at this and you go, what in the world is this all about? So we're going to be talking about Joseph of Arimathea. So if you remember any of your Bible, the New Testament, you'll recall that after the crucifixion of Jesus, that Joseph of Arimathea approached Pontius Pilate and asked, could he get Jesus' body? And Pontius Pilate said, yes, you could. But if he hadn't done this, they were going to basically throw his body and the other two guys that were there into this common grave, and that would have been the end of it. So Joseph of Arimathea, with a colleague, Nicodemus, took the body, and Joseph of Arimathea had his own tomb. It was a hollowed out rock, and they laid Jesus' body there, and just had some ointments, what was it, incense of different sorts, and they dressed him very simply, and then Joseph and Nicodemus rolled this gigantic rock up, and then it was guarded by the guards of the Sanhedrin. And 3 days later, the rock had been rolled back, and the guards weren't there. Mary and Mary Magdalene went into the tomb, and Jesus' body was not there. He was gone. The body was gone. But there was something there dressed in white, and that's what they saw. So that's what we have for Joseph of Arimathea. So what this book does is it goes into a little more detail to trying to describe, who was Joseph of Arimathea.
That's all that survived in the standard.
Yeah. That's all it's in the New Testament. But he shows up in other so-called lost gospels or Gnostic gospels. Okay, and so there's more to the story than this. So the nature of the relationship is that Joseph, the father of Jesus, married Mary, and apparently Mary was quite young. She might have been 16 when she gave birth to Jesus. Joseph had been married to someone else, and that woman was no longer married to him, and so he was much older than Mary. And Mary's father had a younger brother, Joseph of Arimathea. So what happened was that as Jesus started growing up, but it was still quite young, the Joseph, who was the father of Jesus, passed on. And in those days, you had a life expectancy of 30 or 40 years. That was it. And therefore, Joseph of Arimathea became the guardian of Jesus. So that's the first thing that happened. Now, Joseph of Arimathea was quite wealthy. Where in the world did this money come from, this wealth? Well, he ended up owning tin mines, and tin is used to make bronze. And the tin mines are in Cornwall and Devon, which are, the counties on the south coast of England, of Britain. So evidently, these tin mines were first discovered by the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians ended up having fleets of ships that took the tin all through the Mediterranean and sold it to people so they could make bronze, so they could make, whatever they wanted to. The Romans made a lot of weapons out of it, but you could do other stuff with it, clearly. So the Phoenicians were there first. And over time, somehow Joseph of Arimathea ended up being the person that was owning these tin mines. And he himself had a large fleet of ships that took the tin all through the Mediterranean. So all of a sudden, he's become the guardian of Jesus. He evidently took Jesus, and instead of having him continue as his father was as a carpenter, he sent him off to Qumran, which is where John, who had been born 3 or 4 months earlier than Jesus, this is John the Baptist, was there in Qumran studying the most mystic side of Judaism with the Essenes that were there. So they both were there, Jesus and John, as kids studying. And here we have Joseph of Arimathea. Well, Joseph decided that every so often he would go see oversee his mine operation in Britain. So apparently he actually took Jesus with him a number of times to Britain to go see what's going on there. Now, this wasn't simply a holiday. It turns out that Britain was loaded with Celts and Druids, and Jesus was exposed to this philosophy that the Druids and the Celts had, and which he appreciated. And then over time, in the so-called lost years of Jesus, when he was roughly 12 till age 30, those years there that are not described in the New Testament, Joseph of Arimathea evidently, and according to this book, took him with him on business trips, but also to get learning. So he took him to India, where he learned about Buddhism and about Hinduism. And he also went to Tibet and Nepal to learn about more Buddhism. He went off to Egypt. He'd been to Egypt already. They had to escape to Egypt to get away from Herod, but he'd gone to Egypt. And so Jesus was being exposed to all of these disparate philosophies, all due to Joseph of Arimathea wanting to have him have this exposure. And this is where evidently Jesus developed his idea of parables, of wanting to have stories that were simple enough that everyone could understand them, but powerful enough that there would be a truly valuable lesson there. And so this went. So Joseph of Arimathea, being with Jesus, he's actually, again, in the Sanhedrin, the most powerful part of the Judaism. And he went after Jesus had been arrested when he was on the Garden of Gethsemane by the Romans. After he'd been arrested, then there was a big debate with the Sanhedrin, and this one family, the Sadducees, led by Caiaphas and Annas, were the ones that were pushing to have Jesus crucified. But Joseph of Arimathea was there, and he was very well respected. He was very rich, and he was arguing that Jesus should be let go, that he shouldn't be crucified. So that he was right there at the get-go of this stuff. After we skip forward to after the crucifixion, the Sanhedrin didn't go away. They remembered what Joseph of Arimathea had done going up against them. And so they chose to put Joseph of Arimathea and Mary Magdalene and Lazarus. Lazarus is the one that Jesus resurrected, who was dead, but he was Jesus' very good friend. They all got put into one of Joseph of Arimathea's boats, but they decided to strip the boat of all the sails and all the oars, and figuring that then this would be the end of him and all these other troublemakers, and they'd be, good riddance. Well, unfortunately for them, the boat just drifted through the Mediterranean and ended up in Marseille, in the south of France. And Joseph already had boats there as part of his fleet of ships. And so he immediately jumped into this. And he chose to go to England, to Britain. And in 36 AD, So just a few years after the death of Jesus, he created the first Christian church in Glastonbury in England. And then he started to get people to come there, and the framing of what would happen was these are all going to be preachers or disciples that were going to go out into the rest of the world. In particular, they're going to go from Britain to Gaul, and they're going to preach the way. They didn't call it Christianity at that point. They called it the way. This was Jesus' way of differentiating what he was doing from Buddhism or anything else. But it's
Or standard
interesting
Judaism.
that they called it the way. It's very much like the way in the Tao in China. Even though he'd never gone to China, he might have heard of this and picked up on it. So Joseph of Arimathea, by and large, stayed there in Glastonbury, and they kept training people and sending them off to Gaul. And if you remember the Roman emperors that were there in that time frame, 30 AD, 40 AD, 50 AD, people like Caligula and Nero took Christians and used them as torches to line the walkway of his garden, which gives you some idea of what you're up against. So there were a huge number of these preachers that were sacrificed, but they just kept coming to Glastonbury, and Joseph of Arimathea kept teaching them, and they went over all through the Roman Empire. And then of course things flipped eventually when we got to Constantine. And so it goes. So the thing about the book here, just to give you some idea, let me see if I can move this out of the way. Yeah, here we go. It's written by a chap named George Jowett. Okay, so if I go here to this, yeah, he was born in England but moved to Canada at age 19, and he had a number of publishing houses all over the place, and then became the chairman of the board of planning for the St. Lawrence Seaway project. And in particular, the town that he lived in Canada was going to be flooded by the St. Lawrence Seaway. And but he worked on, and he was, as you can see here, was an international gymnastics champion. So this is, when he was still in Britain at that point. But he ended up doing a huge amount of research on this, what's here in this book. And in particular, there were several books out of the Vatican libraries that he references here. And I don't believe these books are that well known, and who knows if they're correct, but I'm just saying that you will not find what I just told you in a lot of other places. This particular chap, who's Canadian, but he's of British birth, it says here, is the one that chose to popularize these ideas. And so it goes. So the thing to keep in mind is Joseph of Arimathea and Lazarus, and I believe Mary Magdalene stayed in Marseille, and that led to the line of what became Christianity that you saw in the what was that popular book in the
Yeah.
90s?
I'm trying to think of it.
Yeah, the one all about the Holy Grail and so forth. There was a very popular book, and Tom Hanks did this movie on it.
Dan Brown wrote it.
Yes.
Yeah, yep.
But there was also a series, the Magdalene series.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of disappointed. The original book had a lot of stuff in it, but it was by and large, when you looked at the details, wrong. but he just didn't fix it. But it made for a great read. I mean, I couldn't put the thing down. I just kept going. So,
It was addictive.
yeah. So anyway, this book here goes through a lot of these things. And the point is that Joseph of Arimathea was very little presence in the New Testament, and yet here this guy is arguing that he actually had a huge impact on Christianity. Another thing that is in here is the guy is very much of a Brit, so he's not a fan of the Romans, and the Romans are the ones, unfortunately, that wrote the histories. So, for example, Julius Caesar, I think it's even in his Gallic Wars, in his book in Latin, was Julius Caesar traveled with some legions over to Britain. And, you know, everybody has this idea that, oh, the Romans just rolled over all the Brits, and that was the end of it. Actually, that wasn't the case at all. Caesar got annihilated. He had to withdraw after 2 weeks back to Gaul. He got really stomped on. And you know, before that, there was the Brits came from the Celts and the Druids. So the Druids were actually very mystical. And in fact, they think that some of these ideas spread through the Mediterranean. And the Celtic side of things has a huge similarity to Hebrew. The main difference is that Hebrew, back in the time of Jesus, had no vowels. Vowels were only added to Hebrew in like the 6th century AD. And so you have to look at the two languages, the Celtic language and Hebrew at that time, and you would see a lot of similarities, a lot of the same sounds. And so one wonders, the Phoenicians could have, in fact, fostered these linkages there because they were running all through the Mediterranean. But the other thing was that the Romans, even though, yeah, they were there in Britain, by and large, the Brits and the Celts, you know, held their own, according to this guy. And there were, you know, numerous battles where the Romans got annihilated, right down to the last legionnaire in what's going on. It was not at all a you know, walk in the park for the Romans running around in Britain. But this led to the you know, really the start of Christianity. But it started in Britain, is what he's arguing, even though you had Paul running around in the Mediterranean. That, by the way, is another thing that's in the book here. I left that out. That I mentioned that in the trial for Jesus, there was Caiaphas and Annas were in the Sadducee family, but there was also Saul of Tarsus, and he was completely rabid and just hated Christians with an incredible fervor. And it was only later, after Jesus had been crucified, when he was on the road to Damascus and was blinded, and then saw the light and became Paul, that he became this just a zealot preacher to run around and create all of the different parishes that were there in the Mediterranean. But at the same time, in Britain, they were covering Britain with Christian parishes and going into Gaul and doing the same. So even in spite of the Roman emperors having all these edicts to go slaughter every Christian in sight, it was you know, truly amazing. So anyway, this is where a lot of these things come from, and you can you know, take a look at it. And with that, I think we will call it a night. Any questions?
This is so interesting because it's like, how is it that, like, today we think, here we go to the moon, we're trying to go to Mars, And at this, with so little technology, they've traversed the world. You know, some people traverse the world as though there was no lid on their jar. And it's fascinating that we don't hear these stories. And it's kind of like, why would that be repressed? What would be, why would, like, you know, some of, you know, the major forces of Christianity will not want this part of Jesus's story to be told. And I also was just looking at something as you were sharing, that Jesus raised a son, like an adopted son.
Yeah.
And I didn't, but why don't we hear that in common modern world? As
This is what's great about the internet, is you can go find these things.
I think you're right, Bart.
What I left out of the story was
That's a very Aquarian thing, by
yeah.
the way.
that what I left out of the story was that apparently both Jesus and John the Baptist were redhead with blue eyes. Okay,
Oh,
they were not dark skinned, and in fact, the Celts are many of them are redhead. You know, the Irish with blue eyes.
so you're saying, what you're saying then, Bart, is that,
But, no, what I'm saying is that if you then look, you'll see that the people that came out of Atlantis were red-haired with blue eyes.
so
And
what,
that's why they ended up in England.
right, so what you're saying is that, who's the great conqueror, that's supposed to be in the DNA of most humans?
Genghis Khan. 10
Yeah.
million. Yeah.
So you're saying that maybe Jesus was his own version of Genghis Khan? Possibly.
Yeah,
Given that he traveled so broadly, and there's all these redheaded people.
Yeah.
That's
That I doubt, but anyway.
I know, but I like just the concept of things that we don't typically think of.
Right.
Very,
But-
very interesting. And you're right, it's all due to the internet is opening up this world in a way that we just never, the average person didn't have access to.
Now, the book that I just cited for you, you know, I looked on the Britannica and I looked on Wikipedia, you know, just to see, and, you know, the people that are there that put those things together on Joseph of Arimathea do not include what this guy included in his book, even though he cites 2 books out of the Vatican Library that are apparently written like in 100 AD. Joseph of Arimathea apparently died in 80 AD. Okay, so those books were probably current. They were probably written by people that had actually, you know, met him or had firsthand, you know, stories about them. So, but
I think our culture has an incredible agenda right now to suppress a lot of knowledge. And a lot of that is done in the name of science. But it's really just another dogma.
Right. Well, science and religion. Both
Right.
now. We're now onto both science and religion is getting
And
repressed.
the church, you know, which distorted a hell of a lot of history, let alone religion and spiritual teaching for its own political purposes. What we think of as the church was really Rome. You know, that's what a lot of the problem is. And, you know, it was taken from these gentle Essenes, you know, they were vegetarian, you know, they were.
yeah, the Essenes, remember,
extremely gentle.
remember the Romans went in, there was a Jewish revolt in, I think, 66 AD, and the Romans went in 70 AD and completely flattened Jerusalem, slaughtered everybody in sight, sold everyone else into slavery, overturned every stone, no temple, etc. Well, they also went over, and the Essenes and Qumran were completely smashed. There wasn't anything left of them except those scrolls that they found, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls that were there.
And then they did the same thing to the Druids.
And the final group that were Essenes were rabid, so they were called zealots. And the zealots went to Masada, and they thought they were safe from the Romans. And if you ever go to Masada, you'll see this incredible rock that goes up, a series of rocks with cisterns and places for food and everything else, housing hundreds of people. And the Romans simply took the Jews that they had as slaves and forced them to build a dirt ramp up to the top. And then
So
they went
Sisyphus.
and slaughtered every Jew, every zealot, except the zealots all took poison the day before the Romans were going over the wall. So that,
Oh, wow.
You
Wow.
could-
Well, I guess maybe that's that where the story of Sisyphus came from, although that's Greek, but.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway.
you know, I just am looking here at something that, there's a common word that we hear all the time in modern and we've lost sight of it. And so when we think of, like, you know, Jesus feeding 5,000, healing the sick, Jesus feeds 4,000 families and blah, blah. And there's something that forms on the crust from the, as crust on the earth that has nutrients in it, from the dew of the morning. And he took those crusts, like salty crusts, like crackers, and that's sort of what's called the bread. And there's a word we all know, but we don't realize what it is. And I read that was the food
It's not manna.
manna from heaven. Yes, yeah, manna from heaven. And manna is that, like, salty crust that forms from the dew, like a wafer. And so he had somehow, again, because he was this world traveler, he picked up all this, you know, worldly knowledge. And so then he came and did these miraculous things that were truly miracles because nobody had that knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's interesting stuff. Good job, you guys.
I mean, again, if you go to Cornwall or Devon or Glastonbury, there's much, much more about the things that happened there with Joseph of Arimathea or Lazarus, or that apparently is where Mary, the mother of Jesus, was buried, was in Glastonbury. And if you go to, for example, into India, you know, and into Nepal and Tibet, you know, there's monasteries there
Yeah,
that
they
swear
visited.
that Jesus came through, and they have all kinds of records of it and so forth. So these are not isolated incidents. They're all over.
Well, you know, it's maybe no surprise then that the Church of England decided that because of the connectivity with, you know, Jesus, they would have that knowledge. You know, the royal family, and the royal family, the king decided that he needed to be equal to the Pope, and so that's the you know, whatever the Church of England is all about. And I'm like, that's amazing. But he may have had the sense of empowerment or entitlement, maybe is the better word, because knowing this history of Jesus, that he felt entitled to, like, you know, grab some of the power away from Rome.
Right.
And nobody even questions any of this stuff. Well, not nobody, but the average person like myself doesn't
Oh, no,
question.
but the church keeps it squashed. The church
Right.
doesn't want, I mean, the whole theory of, I mean, some of the stuff I've read that Jesus actually, that the whole crucifixion was a staged thing, and that really he didn't die, and that he did pilgrim to France and England and continued his teachings with Mary and, you know, that whole rest of the crew. But that doesn't, you know, that's not a better story, right? Like, you don't get the following and the control with, you know, and that's the whole Roman, you know, that whole theory is how do you control people if people know that they can control themselves? You have to have them believe that somebody else has the power and they have to teach you and you have to follow them, right?
Yep, you got it, Nancy.
Sad.
I mean, that's one of the arguments that comes up by Joseph of Arimathea. That, for example, Jesus was only on that cross for maybe 3 hours,
Right.
and normally they keep them there for like overnight,
Right.
and flip the cross upside down to make sure that they're really gone. And so that was part of the argument, was maybe Joseph Arimathea made sure he wasn't really dead. He
Right.
was almost
He
dead.
was
and then-
he was sedated so that he could tolerate that short period of time up, and then they took him down, and that's where they took him to the tomb to be able to sneak him out later. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So there's all, we
Fascinating.
Yeah.
right now it's all conjecture, but who knows what really happened.
Well,
I
I
mean-
just want to say, Jesus was a Jewish mystic. He wasn't a Christian. And that's something that we completely lost sight of.
Oh, yeah.
And he felt he was being a good Jew. And that's the foundation of all of his teachings. And then he had teachings from all over the world, the known world of the time, as we think, except for China. But he was a Nassim. He was a Jewish mystic.
Mm.
But now look who's co-opted him more than anybody else. Italy. What is it? Italy is Rome.
In South America.
Right.
That's true. But
Yeah.
the Vatican, is this they're just a very, very established co-opter of traditions that are so much older. And well, for me, the labyrinth, that came from the so-called pagan feminine teachings. They were earth tools. They were spiritual tools of the earth, of the ley lines, and the earth has chakras, and every cathedral was the site of a spring that was a holy site for thousands of years before it became a Roman shrine, that we now recognize as, the church and Christianity. For me, this is very healing because my roots are English and some Irish. And there's all that, there's a wonderful book about how the Irish saved Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just really wonderful. It was they're the heirs of the Druids, up in these monasteries and in Ireland doing these manuscripts. I just adore the Book of Kells. And it's full of that deep Christian symbolism as they interpreted it. That's all the tarot, So it wasn't verboten to the church. The church was where the universities were. They were teaching astrology and all that symbolism, all that language, the 12 disciples, that was all part of the church's teaching.
Yeah.
Before it split off, it just sort of did this terrible surgery to split off the feminine, and the Druids really understood nature. I think they must have been much closer cousins than I ever thought to the Essenes. And I feel like this is making sense of, I don't know if it's past lives or my literal DNA ancestry or what, but I felt so much resonance with Kabbalah when I first sat down in that class. I have no idea why. As far as I know, I have no Jewish ancestry. One grandmother was a French Catholic, so maybe somewhere in there was some. But to me, this makes sense of just things that I resonate with and feel on a vibrational level. I don't know how else to put it. That there was this connection early on, and then these separate, silos that they teach us. They do that to divide us.
Absolutely. And control. It's power and control is sort of at the forefront and flows down from there. But it's so interesting because the internet is literally, we can't even probably imagine where this is going to go. I mean, I mean, I guess we could.
If they
And
don't
we
start
do.
controlling it.
It's revolutionary power. You know,
Yeah.
it really is. It's,
I have to relay a story. So when I homeschooled my kids, and in 6th grade, they do a pretty extensive, in 4th and 5th grade, we do a lot of the ancients, the Norse and Greek and Egyptian and Mesopotamian and all that kind of stuff. And then in 6th grade, you do a certain amount of Christianity and Islam. We also covered a lot of the Indian stories and whatever. And so my daughter was doing all this and drawing her pictures and writing her stuff up. And at one point, we had done Manu and the fish or something like that, one of those stories. And the 12-year-old looked at me and said, "Mom, can you explain to me, why do these religions fight when all their stories are the same?" And I'm like, well, he's probably a little bit more insightful than many of the grown men on the world, because it's true, right? They all have this root base that they're, innate stories for teaching within our world, right? And so a 12-year-old could figure it out, but
Right.
Yeah, we think marketing is a modern phenomenon. My mother always thought John was like the masterful marketer.
wow.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's cool, Nancy, what you just shared.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, and this whole thing, like we're
But
taught
Stephen's got something to say.
that people believed that the world was flat. They did. They knew that it. I think a lot of people knew that we actually revolved around the sun. But they knew that it was round. They knew that it was a planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
But please speak up, Stephen.
I just wanted to add to Cheryl's comment about the divine monarchy concept in England. Jesus didn't have anything to do with that. It was all Henry VIII, who was Catholic but wanted to have a divorce, and Rome wouldn't allow it. So he unilaterally chose to withdraw from Catholicism and start the Church of England. He was the head of the church. It was all had to do with his wanting to have his marriages dissolved and have a male heir. It had nothing to do with Jesus per se.
Yeah.
Well, maybe as a pragmatic matter in that regard, but maybe there was another deeper layer, Stephen, that he wasn't even fully aware of, or fully aware of what he was grasping for. He could have possibly, there could be a deeper connection because of the possible. We're just theorizing. It's also, theorizing that, maybe he was more prolific than just, feeding masses, 4,000 and 5,000 people at a time and healing. Maybe he was also procreating like Genghis Khan, that we had no idea, because he never had a wife other than his
Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't quite the same kind of wife that we typically think of as husband and wife, right?
Oh, sure.
Oh, maybe. But then the
Yeah.
whole split between the Eastern Orthodox and Catholicism, because there's such, there's that, they're very similar, just a few differences, right?
Yeah, the main difference was there were 12 archbishops, and they collectively governed Christianity. But the one in Rome said, "Well, I'm the Archbishop of Rome, so I get a bigger vote than you other 11 get." And so this was around, I want to say 1000 AD. The other 11 excommunicated the Bishop of Rome, and he reciprocated by excommunicating them. For whatever.
And then he kept the power for himself.
And they went separate ways, but that was even that. You saw Francis has actually went to meet the patriarch in Constantinople, in Istanbul, as part of his papacy. try and bridge that gap. So,
Mm.
I wanted to say one more thing about Henry VIII. There's so many ironies with that story. He kept executing his wives for not producing a male heir. It's
it's his fault.
it's the man who determines the sex of the child.
Oh, I know, craziness.
Yeah. Okay, let's wrap it up. And we will see everybody next week. We'll do, again, the same sort of format. We'll do something different at the end. I just wanted to give you a different flavor of things. But anyway, have a wonderful weekend, and we will take it from there. Bye-bye.
You guys too.
And
Bye.
Bart, I'll
Thank
send
you.
you that email.